You've heard about DMT, have you?
Yeah, it's not pro-opiomelanocortin. Uh,
Um,
it's dimethyltryptamine,
Dimethyltryptamine. Yeah, right.
and it's
DMT.
released in
It's a major neurotransmitter in the brain.
the major. Wow.
Yeah, and it's a primary neurotransmitter in nature. Um, so DMT, an exceptional brain function. I think that's something which we could talk just a bit about and travel into other topics a little as well. Um, so DMT is released, of course, as a primary neurotransmitter, and it's a major neurotransmitter that connects the pyramidal nerves and things that go from the brainstem all the way through to the neocortex. And it's also engaged, which you can see in exceptional brain function. And neurotransmitters and things just like that all start to become a bit more able to be known and measured and this sort of thing. And so suddenly it's really in neurology, you start to become aware of how various neurotransmitters allow us to do certain things. And in fact, that the behaviors themselves um, release neurotransmitters versus, oh, you've got a neurotransmitter and it's going to give you a behavior. The behaviors that you and we have all cause us to have neurotransmitter. Certain brain function where someone's empty inside and the shoulders are really nice and relaxed um, and a sense of curiosity, interest, um, and pleasure is right there because you're accessing more your frontal cortex as you're doing this. And so as you're listening, you have a predominance more of what's called lambda and epsilon wave. Those waves haven't necessarily been looked at much because most people only thought, oh, something must happen within a second or something. And most everything sort of like that happens within a second. But what happens when something is much longer than a second, like, for instance, a wave that happens every 11 seconds, for instance, which naturally it would do as an epsilon wave, is very low. The lowest wave, it's a very flat wave. And so these happen, and there are things below, delta, for instance, like the lambda, for instance. So those are waves which are very flat waves, but within the wave itself has a carrier piggyback frequency, which is very, very strong, like gamma, and it's like a very fast um, flute. If you could hear the sound of a flute, really, yeah. So those waves are very flat, of course, and they have a reverse spin in the way the carrier piggyback it comes off that, and it allows ever more switching fast on and off, and an amplitude of energy arises as a result of it because you've got a noble element, uh, uh, su- uh, super conductive field effect transfer where energy is amplitude of energy comes to be in the body captured from the atmosphere. And a JC quanta, which Jubb constant is minus 71 millivolts, down there you've got a bottom which when a current comes, it sort of is neutralized, and you're able to neutralize the current, when you've got that minus 71 millivolts. Where people are not well, that millivolt isn't really present, like it's proper negative redox to be able to neutralize the current and things just like that. So a balance exists with everything, and for things to happen, and a field vector, sort of like a dynamic current, exists in a static field. So you've got these two things in magnicity, and you've got particle size really, which is the smallest magneton as a Jubb. It's actually a three-dimensional dot and shape it's the smallest magneton that is. It comes from the physics of a light wave and the measurement of a light wave, where you put two light waves together, but they're not the same, plus or minus, which you divide that by itself, but you add plus or minus to the top. Now you're going to end up with a JC quanta, and that's the smallest pixelated dot in space. And so that conducts, so you can imagine it's a sort of really, it looks to be like nothing is out there, but something has existed there, and that's a conductive, very small space, which you're going down to a 10 zillionth of a light meter, basically. But anyway, life is made up out of a confluence of energy and a confluence of vibration. A confluence meaning an overall vibration that's a harmonizedness of all of the vibrations that we have. And, the number 13 features in magnicity, of course, and the number 26 does too. And 26 is the only number out of an infinite set that has an odd and an even in it. So something is harmonious, and you've got where you're lengthening the inspiration through your nose. You're tapping into more endogenous opiates and acetylcholine and things. These are things which connect your brain and body more together. And we produce DMT endogenously within the body, and the pineal gland excretes DMT, and substances is really naturally flowing and allowed to be there, which is anandamide and molecules which people have become sort of more aware about because of CBDs and things like that. But those are things which is in food, and they're also things which we produce, anandamide and indole polypeptides and things which really cause us to feel really fairly elated and sort of empty and sort of receptive. And that happens as a result of somebody sort of really lengthening the inspiration through their nose over some 20 minutes or more. And a conscious attunement is a little bit more to the inspiration through your nose. And ideas come to us more as you're feeling more inspired. And so that sort of breath, which is an inspiration through your nose, triggers these things ever more. And so ketamine, and beta endorphin, serotonin, dopamine, racetylcholine, acetylcholine. If you're into neurology, you're going to quite fascinating area, honest. But it stimulates all that needs to be, and spice, by the way, in food has all these elements in it. And part of the reason why Jubb's Cell Rejuvenation has product which primary 3 amino acids that it's a great focus on in the products is tryptophan, phenylalanine, and tyrosine, which of these amino acids are fragrant amino acids. And so it's the fragrant amino acids which is carrying minerals and element which is so important, like rhodium, osmium, ruthenium, and palladium, which in the 90s it was only just sort of start to become more scientific that you've got these substances in the body which assist to cause you to have superconduction ever more and be connected ever more. So like the sun is an organ of yourself, and the moon is as well. And in eye awareness, you're as empty as stellar as space is, and all the things which you could see physically is and this makes up your body. And in whole brain functioning, pleasure and interest is causing you to have access to your frontal cortex and the whole of the brain, whereas aversion would have shut the frontal cortex down and the left hemisphere, and can have only let a little bit of activity maybe be around the brain stem, perhaps. Nature has designed the frontal cortex to have grown out of an anatomy implicating interest. So you and I, we get into our frontal cortex as a result of that. And our frontal cortex really is our faculty to inspire creative influence of the future and things. So just like we could see cats just love a bit of catnip and things, and dogs really love to jump into a bit of grass. And you've got lacticurium in the grass, and you've got various anandamide that impacts the cat's brain and things from catnip, and things that's like this. And whole brain functioning really is more as interest and pleasure is, and a greater connectivity is through the brain. In this moment, of course, your shoulders are really, really relaxed, and tummy's really nice and relaxed, and somebody's in a receptive state, more like you could hear a pin drop on the carpet, perhaps, you see. So it's really a state of focus and intention. And prominent areas of your brain absolutely do show that you're in a state more like this. And so that was something which was so interesting to me to study in the very early 80s. So all of the various feedback and things, and what could you do where you are just to be able to sit in front of a piece of equipment and impact and change the brain waves and things like that. So it's very interesting. But so endogenous DMT, as we've been talking about, sort of is produced where exceptional brain function is. In exceptional brain function, there really is not any inhibitory areas where somebody's really good with what they do. There's a neural efficiency about it. So you're creating conditions as protective and acute neuroprotective condition because a calmness exists, but you could imagine where that might not have been, and stress was. People could be exposed to stress, but yet it's what we're talking about here is your response to things that's going on, and that's something which you and I, we have a great capacity to be able to manage. Anandamide is released, but otherwise, like where limited mind function is, where we've just been talking and said that aversion neurologically inhibits the frontal cortex, so you only just have a bit of a brainstem and amygdala and tegmentum function a bit. And in that limited mind function state, a great neuroplasticity, which ordinarily would be there, just doesn't exist, you see, because the transaction that could be possible only can be because the brain has a capacity to be able to pick a pattern out. It's interesting because we could have out of 100 people all looking at a stereogram, we'd all would get a bit of a score for how quick and easy was it for you to be able to see the three-dimensional image that pops off the stereogram versus people could be standing there and not ever be able to see it. And so how functional, plastic, and the neuroplasticity of the brain ever more being open in agreeableness, of course, and what social connectedness is, stimulates the septal region of the brain. And this is the organ of alliesthetics and your sense of feeling good. So we have a sense which is about feeling good. And this is your septum pellicidum, and the septal region of the brain itself, which engages the septal pellicidum, and perhaps it's possible for us to talk a bit about that in the program. But it's a window that's the most see-through membrane in the whole body, and it's like a window between the two huge lakes that you have in your brain. And we all think, oh, well, you've got a lot of brain up there. But in fact, of course, the brain is floating in fluid, and there's huge lakes that soften and cushion it, so it's sort of frictionless for itself. And water, a central nervous system fluid, fills in these ventricles, and between the two large ventricles you've got a window, and it's a very clean, clear window called the septum pellicidum, and there you've got the finest substances we've just been talking about in this podcast today in the body, and the readout that comes from that connectedness is sort of is a relaxedness and an ease of ability to be able to manage stress response, and a great amount of information crossing over from one hemisphere to the other through the corpus callosum, which is a bundle of connective tissue, which this pellicidum comes to be connected to at the very front of your brain. And as this area is functioning, it neurologically inhibits the amygdala, and it causes whole brain patterning and things, you see. So it's sort of really great. You could see in nature, of course, all sorts of animals and everything which have a relaxedness more in a moments of time where they're de-stressed and things. And that's quite a likable sort of a feeling that animals have when that goes on. And you and I as well. So lactucarium is an opiate and things. It comes from grasses and leafy vegetables and things. And muscimol is a molecule. These are all similar to DMT. And dolphins even, and porpoise I've seen, passing puffer fish to each other because the puffer fish has a little toxin in it, and they'll just grab it and quickly just touch it a bit and throw it, pass it over to another fish. And so these puffer fish are giving them a little bit of a toxin to the porpoise and dolphin, and suddenly you just see them laying belly up, looking at the sky for a little while, and just relax, looking up at the sky, and all of them in the pod sort of thing. Wallabies I saw also, and wombats, all eating various food which has substances that make you laugh a little bit and things just like this, and Mysteraceous types of species are, just like to give you an example, various foods that's in nature, like Virola difera, which has sort of like a red sap bark and things, and trees and plants which sort of belong to the nutmeg family and things like that all have these compounds and substances in it, which naturally causes you and I to be drawn to those foods. Molecule which allows you to really feel happy, and it causes you to be able to get things done. Dopamine, of course, serotonin, oxytocin is released as you're feeling more connected to everyone. I mean, as thinking and your own cognition relates to your feeling more connected to everyone, you're releasing more oxytocin. And so beta endorphins, and these are molecules, opiates and things which we produce inside these are reward molecules for those listening. And serotonin is another, and you need serotonin to be able to disconnect bits and pieces. So, even when you're forgetting something, that's a memory, and you're remembering to forget things. And serotonin is necessary for you to be able to do things just like that. So a fluidity is existing, and you've got a really great connection that you're feeling. Oxytocin is released. Acetylcholine is the only neurotransmitter which connects the brain to your muscles. And so this is all good, of course, where no toxin exists. But what happens suddenly where you've got a lot of heavy mineral from rock crushed up, for instance, and sold as magnesium, which most of it's toxic, but toxin and heavy metal in it. Rock salt from inland lakes do as well, where ocean wind evaporated salt doesn't at all. And everything about the latter salt is something which can easily be transmutated and doesn't leave any colloidal mineral residue left behind, which sodium chloride sure does from inland lakes and things where that's being wrongfully consumed. Of course, that's not a proper salt for us to be able to have where wind evaporated salt is. But which would just come to talk just a tiny bit here just about salt for a second, because it holds water to itself like crazy, and way more than what might be or should be in the body where things are, where it gets deposited. And above all these things which we've just been talking about, starts to become harmonized ever more that you've brought ocean wind evaporated salt in, because otherwise then not too much harmony could have been above where the podcast's been talking a bit about today. So heavy rock salt, where that would have been, it's dead, and it increases sodium absorption into the blood wrongfully, because it can't be regulated properly. And sodium there in the blood regulates potassium. Yes, it does. So you've got sodium and potassium supposed to be in a ratio relative. And you've got more sodium, of course, there in the blood than you do in the tissue, which we can't really have any in the tissue. And so we've got potassium inside the cell, and then sodium's on the outside of the cell. And this arrangement is supposed to be kept, but how can it if you're just tucking into things which has got a lot of rock salt? And so that you'd be sweating salt under your armpit, and that shows you definitely do have a condition which, why don't you pay attention to things a bit more about cystic fibrosis and other things, where we've got some really good podcasts about this. But low plasma sodium and high plasma potassium, possible what would be wise where things are, but where things impact your ratio of things, because someone's not really getting any potassium much, because where are they getting that? Honest. Most food is so cooked out, and the potassium that would be there only has got 18 north negative rather than 19. And so it's not going to function like it really should or could or would, that you focus more with the value of enzymes in food, which is about life food, which is another topic a bit. But so these things all impact, like if you're looking at the kidneys, the zona glomerule of adrenal activity, and excess excites, it causes high blood pressure and low potassium, gives extreme thirst, and all of that stimulates and also inhibits sort of a magno-neutral type of a sodium chloride. And so these things also have to become more haywire. Why? Because we're not designed to lick rocks to get your minerals. And so crushing them up to put them into food, it'd be just the same as licking the rocks to get it. And it's just not on. You can't lick a bumper bar to get chromium, for instance. These are very different in an orthophilic state, meaning straight with nature, versus found in a rock form or something that's not in an orthophilic state that's consumable. So rhodium, osminium, ruthenium, palladium, these are in the back of your eyes. At some point we might get to talk a bit about how energy, direct current is created from your eyes, from light and things. But in this story today, we've just been talking a bit about DMT, and we've talked about all substances which are released relative where exceptional brain function is. But then all of a sudden, what happens when you're just tucked into a lot of food? You've got sodium chloride, and it's just really mountains of it, in the capillaries, places just before it can empty into the lymph, and it's sort of like stuck there, slowly but surely has to be brought to the skin to be excreted and sweated out, and this sort of a thing. But otherwise, aldosterone, which would be if you're excessive where salt is like that, you have an aldosterone excess, which is a hormone that's released by the kidneys. And whenever stress would be existed a bit, you've got angiotensin too. And so these two combine, and you've got renin and angiotensin stress, which along with if you've someone has just excessive breath, like they're breathing like a rabbit, so they're not keeping any carbon dioxide in there. So all of this then all of a sudden causes ever more low potassium levels and things. And kidneys are filtering and doing what they can to help regulate everything. And so this up and down, all just because somebody's consuming a lot of rock salt, which is dead salt, and truly disastrous at the hospital, because after a few days you end up with septicemia because of the rock salt, which is wrong and shouldn't be brought in whatsoever. Only wind evaporated enzymatic salt should be. So if that salt is excreted suddenly more excessively because you've got something that happens dramatic, like for instance someone has nitric oxide like as a drug or something, or they release more nitric oxide as a result of things, and suddenly a lot of that salt and substance gets released. The balance of sodium and calcium and potassium and urea also have to have a proper good balance. And hyperaldosterone, where somebody's consuming a lot of flesh, typically they'll consume salt where that is too. And so they really do have this high, meaning hyper aldosterone that's existing. So somebody should really stop that flesh habit, because how could they live a long life where that is, which we've really got not anything in our body to be able to manage it whatsoever. And so shouldn't it be that you could consider also live food where we are and where you are, and look into this more? Of course, babies that are born to mothers that have consumed live food during the pregnancy, these babies don't have any meconium. Meconium is like a poop, and that the baby has pooped. And so should the baby poop? Well, the baby is pooping because the mother could be consuming foodstuffs which is to pass through the child in utero, and that's not something which would ordinarily be whatsoever. And so meconium aspiration and these sorts of things, syndrome, and meconium is not an uncommon thing which you could find in the amniotic sac and the fluid, which shouldn't be ordinary there, and it turns the color slightly more green to brown, and so the baby, or many, matter of fact, most don't even know what a natural birth is, because that could be another topic as a podcast. But babies have to pass through meconium, and that stool is in the amniotic sac in fluid, and so what you've got there in that meconium is sort of digested sorts of little Wernicke cell and lanugo, which is very fine hair particle. But it's a crazy thing that you find plastic when you look at that. Oh my God, yes, microplastic and bile and indigested protein and things from the mother's consumption wrongfully of dead food during the pregnancy. which we'd learn about what live food is versus what dead food is. Live food really is low methionine, low phosphate, and some more value to enzymatic, enzymatic value relative. Otherwise, food stuff is indigested protein and fat and excessive phosphate and methionine in the diet, and that sort of ends up sort of with this meconium is where children are born, which they shouldn't, of course, be born under the circumstance of that, and it's sort of a dark, sticky, sort of thick, material that would be ordinarily there. So at this point, it's sort of really maybe good for us, mate, just to talk just a tiny bit about, behavior is what causes neurotransmitters. And it's interesting because you've got linguists around the earth, and they have all thought, where they looked at language, that all language was only something which had recursiveness in it, meaning somebody's saying something over and they're not exiting, basically. So it just would be looked at, and everybody would be thinking that only language existed that was recursive, and yet, like whole brain patterning, where they've got more non-recursive language, and it's just only sudden more interest in this because it was just assumed that all language was just recursive, meaning language that is occurring between people is going over things but not necessarily exiting and going over the same thing or putting more things in there than should be. So, for instance, like when I say I love you, for instance, I love you. So there's three words. And if you put more words to that, you're actually diminishing the meaning of I love you. So we all think that you could add more to something, but adding more to something actually conditions and changes the meaning of various things. But so language is congruent and integrated, and when you're associated, I mean, these are things which somebody could learn. There's a great book, Jubb's Little Red Book, which you could look at Amazon to learn a bit more about this. But language really is present tense more, where there's non-recursive languaging, or otherwise it's slipping into tense, which is really not present, the past or the future, and how much time is somebody spending more in the present associated to the now versus dissociated. So language can give you a sense of to what degree somebody's associated versus dissociated. So you could really say that everything is relative, and that Pavlovian conditioning is the primary thing that goes on, because like at the age of 3, some of us could have had 66 million more words than others at the age of 3, which somebody maybe heard, only 650 odd words an hour, whereas someone else heard 1,500 words more an hour. By the age of 3, somebody's really heard a lot more words. I mean, this relates directly to IQ, and so you could see a economic discrimination that certain goes on. So people in Nepal might, on average, have 42 IQ, and Guatemala maybe, I think, might be 49 perhaps, or something. In America here today, it's sort of 86. And so there's 46 other nations which have a higher IQ than what is going on where America is. And so what's happening where the school system is sort of a bit of another topic, but that's something which we should do a podcast a bit about. But like coming back to like, I love you, that's a statement, and there's nothing recursive there. Whereas if you add something on or you're coming into ever more recursive types of languaging versus having a neural efficiency where something is. So you and I, we have a random phoneme generator, which is which is generating things which is said, and it's skimming from all these channels that's happening below, and the information that's in each of these sensory motor channels below is weighted just the same as AI does and is programmed to do. And so Pavlovian conditioning could have caused you to have more kinesthetic, auditory, visual in the way that you process information, which is more whole brain patterning versus looking at stuff, hearing things, and then feeling something about it, which isn't a whole brain function pattern way. Because as you're feeling, you've got a preference in your feeling, then you could go on to hear. If you have a preference in what you're hearing, you can go on to what you see. Because it's in an order of things that's like this, as interest is that you're engaging and have got into your frontal cortex, and you've developed an outward lived pattern as a meditation, which is ongoing, and you're focused more, being more in eye awareness. And so language is just like Pavlovian conditioned behavior is given mostly like what you think via group think. So group think. So Johnny marched off to war even if Johnny really didn't want to go to war. So group think. It's sort of really something is going on there which is programming us, and something is implicit and something is explicit. Implicit meaning intuitive, and explicit sort of being something being explained. It's just something is you're drawing upon things which is has a validity which is of a construct, but also some context as well. So expert can look at something, and these are ways that someone could look at valid. If something is valid, if it's reliable, it means that things which we're just talking about is something repeatable. So it's interesting that RB1 gene, wherever you find that on the earth, you find also subject, object, verb, and it's like what you're listening to, it's subject, object, verb. But it's an interesting thing that around the world you've got verb, object, subject, object, verb, subject, verb, subject, object. You've got a whole range of a different way of going about things rather than subject, object, verb. But in a logical sense, subject, object, verb pretty much is there where language is. So whole brain functioning really is you and I ever more triggering logic, and this is non-recursive. It's non-iterative. So language really is in a whole brain functioning pattern. It doesn't really depend upon any other terms, what's recursive is sort of things which then depend upon other terms and things. So it's very conditional that you and I would have ease of ability to be able to exit from things which go on. And what happens where somebody has more recursiveness, or they ruminate and they cannot exit from the program. And so into older age, it can be that someone, once they get into a diversity state, they're not able to shift themselves back into a pleasant state. And whilst in an averse state, everything is state specific with aversion, and it's a lot of don't, won't, can't, should, try, but, must, only, never, always going on. And that's not about something positive, which it could be. So until somebody's really learned how to use adversive language, maybe they should let that go until, for a year or so. And once they've framing things positive, now you can throw adversive words in, because now it's about something positive. So you could really say something like, try not to have a lot of fun with this over the days ahead. So that's an embedded command for, have a lot of fun with this over the days ahead. Because there's no such thing as negation at the primary level of experience. So one, spontaneous creative intelligence, which is the primary act of spirituality, fully like a principle. As you and I, we all can be more in our spontaneous creative intelligence. And when you're not, it means you're in an adverse state. You're not really in your proper frontal cortex whatsoever. But when you are good because now you're getting agreement, and that's the best thing for us, because the most intelligent one amongst us is someone who's getting agreement. And can we get everything through agreement? Yes, you can. So because you could have agreement with a condition or agreement outright, you see. So those are two ways of responding versus polarization, which is a no, which is a don't want, can't, should, try, but must only. I mean, this is sort of really learned and not something natural at all. So light, which is presupposed sort of really as some sequence which you exit your eyes in your conversation with people, so that you're looking to see what the response is that you've got back in the signing and the way that you're going about things relative. But how many people know how to look at someone in their eyes? If you ask people to put their hand up, most people don't put their hand up with that one, because that's something which there's a learning about. But sorting information really, and having a great capacity to have instantaneous recall, water can for several weeks if it's living and it's subject to a coherent frequency. So you've got a preferred groupthink which could have been going on, and could that be whole brain functioning languaging, or recursive reminiscent types of sequencing, where nothing is sort of ruminant, you don't really have polarization either, and you don't have meta responding, which is going over things and not exiting. Because you've got two patterns which cause people to be stuck more. One is just not exiting, and the other is just focusing on polarizedness as response. And yet you've got agreement, and you've got agreement with condition. So those two patterns in our brain can cause you to be more frontal cortex orientated and more whole brain patterned, and not in recursive types of languaging and things. And so how you're modeling things and what you could learn more, there's so much, isn't it? Subject, you're always focused on what the subject is, and object and verb, and within a short moment, who's listening is sort of really aware more what the subject is and what's objective about the subject, and what could we do more where this is like subject, object, verb. So you've got a structure, you've got a structural validity, where language is, you've got a contextual validity, and then you've got people who are experts evermore who can agree where this is as to the validity of it, and then you're looking to see how reliable, how repeatable, more or less, is information. So for you and I or anyone to be more in our spontaneous creative intelligence, lengthening inspiration through our nose, we've talked about life food, and we've just mentioned a bit about salt. But what's clear for you that allows you really to clear away everything, and so you've really got a great receptivity evermore. You could pick up patterns and have a functional plasticity. And the complexity, which would have been where recursive code was, isn't anymore, and you're exiting evermore the chunks of behavior that come up. And so you've got a test operate, test exit, like called a tote, and that is a behavior that when you're looking at something, you're thinking about how can you measure things. And behavior has been something which most haven't studied because they couldn't think, well, how do you isolate and measure certain things about behavior itself, which is just so fascinating to me. So I think that you really, have a polar completeness versus polarization. So polar completeness is you've got north negative in south positive, you've got south positive in north negative, and you don't have something which is just one or the other, basic. And so you have more polar completeness in life, and you've got an age of an logarithm being used, which is being broken, of course, because 78% would ordinarily be general positive, 22% would be adverse to something, so that you could get a message passed on. But that's all being swapped and changed around wrongfully by those that are controlling the net. And to bring about a golden age, it would be because we've got positive inducted currency, not negative inducted currency. And how come you're not talking about this? You see, why is United Nations not talking about banking and things just like that? So you've got a lot of things which is being redacted, but in a golden age, you've got an extended surface of ever more capacity. You've got an understanding of how north negative is a great conductor, and to get a higher voltage in your body, which you do have, where you've got a hemisynchronization that's happening between the hemispheres, you've got a higher amplitude of energy more that comes through the body. And the heart percussion uses a vacuum, and you've got a rhomboid figure eight folding in on itself and coming out on itself at the same time. That's what goes on where a rhomboid is. And this process impacts the red blood corpuscle, and the shape that it has as like a disc gives it a lift, and it's a magno hydrodynamic lift. And just like the electra, which is the covering on the beetle, has tiny small structure that generates north negative below and south positive above, and that dynamic, the north negative is always going to the south positive, and so it's sort of giving a magno-hydrodynamic sort of lift there, and the same with the blood is as well, and same with craft that's made as well. You've got a magnetized plasma flow, and blood is supposed to have rhodium, osmium, and ruthenium, but what happens when you don't have those elements? It's something which is a great deep focus where the product is in Jubb cell rejuvenation. But all because of superconduction that's supposed to be there, and a colloidal tension which is supposed to be there for things to be working. If you've got extraneous salt, it wants to hold so much water to itself, it doesn't let the body function like it should. It impacts the colloidal tension. But in nature, just as you're born, you're having DMT released, and various other moments evermore, you sort of have moments of DMT release a bit and things which connect our brain ever more together. This podcast is something which kind of does this. You've got red blood corpuscle, which comes to be nice and discrete and flowing, and hydrogenation of the cell is present. But otherwise, could you imagine like all sorts of therapies that people doing where it could all of a sudden have sudden shifts, and that sudden shift can slough off arteriosclerotic plaque, and that can cause because of sort of like a geocolloidal, a geomagnetic kind of jerk, if you could say, and causing floating globules of lipoprotein suddenly to be loosened from blood vessel and things just like that, coming to be settled in places, and that can truly cause stroke and cause all sorts of brain conditions and heart condition and things. So today, if people have a lot of plaque and things, lots of activities, therapy and stuff could be not necessarily useful because it could jerk material off, and that can cause someone to perish ever more. So magnohydrodynamics is modified, of course, where you learn more about vitamin L which is N-acetyl-neurominic acid, vitamin L, and that's the surfactant that we're supposed to have in our body. You can only have that if you've got proper gastrin and secretin function digestion-wise. So waves exist where plasma is in oscillation, and you've got extremely low frequency waves and acoustic waves. You've got very low magnetic frequency, and it's magneton and acoustics going on, and a phase velocity, you see, where you've got a north negative and a south positive and a north negative and a south positive. You've got a feed line flowing that you do like in the vessels of the blood, and so you've got a hill behind yourself which you're sliding down, and a valley in front which you're always surfing into. And so you've got oxygen which gets picked up, and hydrogen and carbon and oxygen and nitrogen and all of these things which are supposed to be more in a vacuum energetics, and it really is so important, matter of fact. So sometimes you've got element like in our formula, for instance, where you've got proper nutrient, which is in its orthophilic state. Orthophilic meaning straight with nature. Otherwise, it's a mineral, but it's not in its orthophilic state. It could be it's a diatomic state more. But imagine that you've got selenium, you've got lithium, you've got fluorine, you've got elements which you can get really quite a high voltage from. And it's that high voltage which dissolves heavy metals and a resistant element and helps clear that away. So you have to have a bit of voltage there to be able to atomize things, to clear things away. And so vitamin C, of course, and where are you getting that if it's in a whole food vitamin complex and things? Anyway, so basically you really have got, from light, you have got a conductive current that comes about in our body, and that might be something that we could begin to talk a bit about in the next podcast that we do. You've got, around the world, people dying, where wars are, and a credit is being used to have all of that happen in a monetary system which is really like a criminal banking cartel of a one world order more, and that is outside a nation and running all nations. So isn't that something which should be talked a bit more about? But you've got that system which has come from pledging. How bad is that? That's slavery and trespass and forgery just going on for all of that to have happened. And it's not plausible. It sure is. It's very plausible. It's in fact, that's actually what is going on more. So wouldn't it be better for everybody to understand money mechanics and see, like what we've been talking about, is you have a bank inside yourself which impacts and directs the current that comes in, and that currency, you're the bank and everyone is the bank. You're the real estate, not gold or anything else. You're the one that's valued, and you're of an unlimited worth versus just these things which are being counted, and you're being left out of the picture. This is just terrible. We'll be living more in a golden age when we start to come into all of this, of course. So just think about it, honest. You've got thermophil. These are life colloid that love warm water. Matter of fact, they so love warm water that they can be in such a scalding environment as several hundred degrees and only be able to reproduce at that heat. That's like boiling. You've got bioluminescence. When you look with a black light into your eyes, you'll see incredible luminescence coming back to you of color. And so what do we know about rhodium, osmium, and ruthenium in the back of your eye, and how much do we know about how light is converted into direct current in our body? These are things which we could talk in a podcast coming up. You've got life colloid like psychrophile, which really love cold and only exist in the cold. Then you've got psychotrophs, which really are more in light, and mesophil, which is sort of in between things. Which, look, you've got a whole range of life colloid, which exist in various temperatures and things. And you and I, we have to keep our temperature just at perfect core temperature relative. And when our core temperature drops, suddenly we don't really function the same. And so, dysbiosis occurs until that gets all cleared up. So anyway, Abelgate is the Pope is your boss, and Abilene is a paradox after that, which somebody else made the rules. You didn't agree with those, and you don't have any means to manage disagreement. And that's what the Abilene paradox is. How about looking that last one up about paradox, because probably we should talk a bit about paradox. And what is a paradox? You see, it's something which is conflicted, and it's not logic. And lots of fallacious reasoning has existed, which isn't reasoning proper, like a slippery slope, for instance, or bandwagon appeal, or straw man argument, which anybody's listening, they should really learn a bit more about this, because it's really better for you to be able to get a sense of what's going on where someone is, and you're able to, have a better response and things yourself. We can be living in a better world. The conflict where that is really because you've got a criminal bank cartel of a one world order dysfunction, honest, and that is you and I, where you and I are having an opinion, and how does that cause public policy to come to be? And so that's a lot of the work, a lot about the eclipse movement. But anyway, I think we've had a pretty good podcast today here, but this one that we've just been talking about, and we've just been really talking about DMT, an exceptional brain function today. We talked about how molecules cause you to feel happy, how lengthening the inspiration through your nose is what we should do. We talked about whole brain patterning, which isn't it is non-recursive versus recursive languaging, meaning going over things and not exiting. So there's patterns of preferred ways that you sort information, and we just said, if you feel, then you hear, then you see. This is a whole brain patterning. And we just left off by saying, oh my God, the temperature our body's supposed to have, otherwise it can pleomorph into organisms which could live at a lower temperature, which that could then cause fever and things like that, which that causes us to get back our proper health and things. We talked a little bit in the program about live food versus dead food, and then we ended a little bit just like looking at the world and considering like the criminal banking cartel of a one world order. We were very dysfunction about that. And where do you and I, which is what we're talking about, fit above the legislative assembly, that you can cause opinion that happens in case law and things, which is on the right side of the court, more to assist to help us, all of us. And so the system can function like it's supposed to.
I like that.
All right. Well, I'll give you a call back, mate, and we can maybe do another program, yeah?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, all right, mate. I'll call you. Love you, mate.
Love you too.
Okay,